Hey, and yes, it's a second Rumble in a row. It's wow, really? No way, no show. Yeah, it's I. So this week I actually want to talk about mostly RuneScape 3 things, because that's kind of what's been popping off lately. And obviously the first topic, the UI sharing. What is UI sharing? It's the brand new RuneScape 3 update. Really cool update, by the way, like really amazing update that lets you just search the name of a player and essentially just it gives you their UI, and that's like really cool because RuneScape 3 UI tends to be an absolute fucking nightmare to deal with. So this update actually came at a really good time, honestly. First of all, it's a bit surprising because they just sort of said, oh yeah, we're working on UI sharing, so you'll be able to share your UI. Here it is, and it just kind of came as a surprise, especially because UI is such a contentious topic in RuneScape. I mean, I get it, in a way everyone sort of prefers their own UI, I get that, but at the same time, I think that for newer players especially, it's nice to have, like, a specific UI they can just use, especially from, streamers or YouTubers or whatever, because it's very common for RuneScape players, especially to watch content on YouTube, and sometimes if you see someone with a really clean UI or whatever, it's good to be able to just go in and be like, yeah, I want to use this player's UI. So it's honestly, I think it's a very underrated update. Like, I think, yeah, sure, look, people are singing its praises, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, no one actually cares or whatever. No, but like, it's actually that fucking good, it's actually that fucking good. Like, I think it's a really good update, and I really hope that people actually do see how impactful it can be. Another thing, however, that I thought about it, because this is something that kind of annoyed me a little bit, you can save layout preset in RuneScape 3, like you can save a couple of layouts, right? So you can just click on them and then you load the layout preset and your UI layout just gets loaded. That, however, hasn't been the best, especially when it comes to, it's very cumbersome to like save presets and actually load them and stuff like that, because sometimes like I'm not sure if I save the preset and then it just loads the other preset that I wanted to save it on top of, so it's a fucking mess basically, and I don't necessarily enjoy that system too much. Something that the UI sharing actually allows you to do is to just have an account with a specific layout, like a UI layout, and then if you ever like play on another PC or something like that, you can just go in and pretty much just load from that account, or like if you're making videos or whatever, rather than having to rely on those presets, you can just have a second account that has your preferred UI for gameplay, and then you can just change your UI around however you want to make videos or take screenshots or do whatever, without necessarily needing to then remember how to get your UI back or anything like that. So honestly, really fucking cool thing. It's a really cool feature. I think it's really important to just the game and the future of the game and everything. I cannot say, or I cannot show how important this update actually is. I think it's a really good update, and again, like, especially because right now, a thing that happens is, if you go on YouTube and you search for, like, UI guides or whatever, there's a couple and whatnot, but now what you can do, especially as a creator, is just UI layouts, and people can you can have multiple accounts, and then people just go through the video and, oh, I like this layout, and instead of having to learn how to make the layout and follow the guide, they can just like input the name of the account using it that you're presenting in the video, and then just, hey, that's the UI layout. They don't even need to like actually properly, learn a fucking thesis and fucking have a PhD just to fucking know, oh yeah, by the way, this is what you can do with a fucking UI in the game. So that's honestly really fucking cool. I think it's a really, really underrated feature, despite the praise that the community is giving it, which thank fuck, because honestly, and this is a bit of a transitional period now, because I'm going to transition to the second topic, which is, I feel that sometimes RuneScape 3 players just don't tend to fucking appreciate some of the updates that the team does. I get it, some of them are quality of life updates, and I get that RuneScape 3 doesn't tend to look at quality of life updates from a perspective of, oh, this is a really good update, this is an update that needs to be focused on and everything. I mean, look, we got to a point where I've seen people say that they don't consider combat achievements that are coming to RuneScape 3 fucking content updates. Like, that's not a content update, and it's like, what? How can some players not consider that content update? Genuinely. Like, this was a huge thing in old school. Like, old school was all about, like, oh yeah, the combat achievements, they're coming, and look at how cool they are, and look at all of the, cool cosmetics you get for your Slayer Helm, and all of the cool things per tier and everything, and look at how many tasks we have, and you'll be able to do every boss and everything, and we have Slayer tasks, and, like, it was this huge thing. Like, it was a huge content update, right? So the fact that some RuneScape 3 players just don't see that as a content update is just wild. So I'm glad that at least with the UI sharing, everyone is like, no, this is like a proper tier update. Again, like, it's just a quality of life thing, but people are treating it as this immense thing that is like really important for the game, which it is, because, these games, and especially RuneScape 3, they're so old, and you need a lot of quality of life updates to make them playable, and to make them, good, to make them feel polished and whatnot, right? And oftentimes, at least compared to old school, and the second topic that I sort of want to bring in is the blog posts, and how people sort of tend to, or how blog posts are essentially telling of how people treat updates in the game, or in both games. Whereas old school RuneScape really loves to just try and always make you excited for playing whatever new update they have in store, even if many times during many weeks they don't have any major updates, they don't have any new content or new areas or whatever, because those take time to develop and those take time to make, so, you can't release them every week. So, it's really cool for them to be like, hey, there's, like, look at, this cool new thing that we made that it's mostly just quality of life updates, but yeah, these changes, we made them to this, like, minigame or whatever, so now you can go and try it out, and you can go and play it, and, like, they make it sound exciting to just play the different parts of the game, right? Where in RuneScape 3, a lot of the blog posts are just, yeah, here's the patch notes, sorry that we don't have any major update. Hey, cool, exciting, here's the boss. Anyway, here's more patch notes for the following weeks. It's like, no, like, you have so much cool shit to advertise, because RuneScape 3 gets so many quality of life updates, primarily because we don't have RuneLite, and as a result, a lot of shit needs to be done by Jagex themselves, right? And it's kind of wild that they don't advertise them more in the blog post, that they don't make the blog post like feel like, oh yeah, here's a huge thing we're doing that, yeah, sure, isn't a content update necessarily, but this quality of life update's like amazing, and like, we made this content, or this piece of content, so much better, so you should definitely go give it a shot, you should definitely go and try it out, and like, I don't, personally, I just don't understand, or like, personally, I don't think it's good that they don't do those things more often, because in old school, that's their bread and butter, that's what they do, and as a result, the reception of the community is that, hey, it's exciting to play the game, because there's a new update, regardless if that update is big, if it's small, if it's straight up new content, or just quality of life, it doesn't matter, like, it's an update, it's exciting to play the game. But in RuneScape 3, it feels that, unless it's like this huge expansion or whatever, it doesn't feel exciting to play, because the blog posts also don't really make it exciting. And I get it, the blog posts don't make it exciting because the community doesn't find a lot of these things exciting, right? The community has sort of this, view that quality of life updates aren't updates, that, you just don't need to work on them or whatever, so as a result you shouldn't perceive them as updates, which I think is really harmful for the game. And, I think that it's important for the blog post to sort of be like, hey, here's the cool new shit about the game, and make it exciting for you to go and play it. Because RuneScape 3 has so many moving parts, but it feels like, and like, don't get me wrong, RuneScape 3, compared to old school, gets so many fucking quality of life updates. Like, it's actually wild. Like, RuneScape 3 gets so fucking many, but it's like, it feels like they never get any, because the blog posts just feel so dry most of the time, because the team doesn't want to, like, try and hype up the quality of life updates, because most of the community is going to be like, oh, this is not a real update, like, why are you trying to get us hyped for this? And I just think it's so harmful for the game, because you need essentially these types of updates and this type of culture where the community not only understands but appreciates the new content changes that are made to the game, even if they are just quality of life updates, right? Because they're important, they're really important, and I think it's really telling that, for example, RuneScape 3 doesn't get a lot of early game and mid game content, never mind, actual new content, oftentimes it's hard for you to just have a change early to mid game, even quality of life, never mind, like, old school RuneScape this week got the Ice Giant boss and the Fire Giant boss. This is after they already have the Hill Giant and the Moss Giant boss fights, right? And they're mid-game content, they're not like end-game content by any means, they're just mid-game content, who cares type thing, right? But it's exciting because it's new mid-game content, and while a lot of players might not make use of it because most players are probably just gonna go for the log and get a pet and move on with their lives, right? For a lot of mid-game players, it's like this new exciting thing that they now have access to, right? They don't need to wait for the end game to do bosses or whatever, because they have so many, like in old school you just have so many mid-level bosses. And these are possible because people tend to celebrate these types of updates. So Jagex doesn't feel like they're losing potential players, or they're losing interest in the game because, we're not releasing endgame content all the time, right? So they can take their time to actually release endgame content, which usually means that it comes out with a lot of quality, but they also can take the time to just release mid-game content, early game content, make adjustments to those, right? But in RuneScape 3, it feels like, unless it's an endgame quest or endgame boss or whatever, it's just that content, don't do it, and people perceive it really badly, you shouldn't hype it, you shouldn't work on it, right? And I think that a lot of the blog posts tend to reflect that, especially when it comes to quality of life updates, where it's like, sure, we did remove the cap of clue scrolls, and that's probably a very big fucking update, because, for example, if it was old school, being like, okay, we're locking you to like 10 clue scrolls, and you then, because RuneScape 3 used to have this thing where you could only hold 25 clue scrolls at a time, 50 with some things, and then, you could hold way more than those, but that was the soft cap, at least from monsters, right? Like, you couldn't get them as drops, you would have to get clue scrolls by other means, right? And essentially, they removed that cap, and now you can get as many clues stacked as you want in RuneScape 3. And given how big the RuneScape 3 community, clue community is, I just found it baffling that this entire thing came in like a little, fucking phrase in the patch notes. That was it. Like, if that shit had been old school, they would be like, hey, cool new change to clue scrolls for the community. Now you can, have as many clue scrolls as you want. And, maybe they would even have a paragraph explaining why they made that change or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, old school blog posts make updates, even the smallest ones, sound incredibly exciting, right? Making you excited to just go into the game and, yeah, let's do some clue scrolls because, hey, they got this cool new change. But in RuneScape 3, unless it's like some huge update, no, it's just like it's relegated to the patch notes where it's like, we can't make this sound too exciting. Even if the change is like mega exciting, we cannot make this sound too exciting because otherwise players think that we're baiting them and trying to sell them content that, isn't that big and that we're not actually working on big content. And it's like, I just think it's so harmful for the game, especially because the game thrives on casuals, right? And these types of cultures where you celebrate small updates, early game updates, mid-game updates, and stuff like that, yeah, look, let's be fucking honest, a lot of them are gonna be that content, and a lot of them are not gonna be used for a long time, right? But they're still needed for the game. I think I already gave this example, but I'll give it again. In old school, there was a change that they made to agility, where essentially you have rooftop agility courses there. Which, by the way, I don't even know why RuneScape 3 didn't just steal that idea. Like, what the fuck are you people? Just steal the fucking idea, man. It's good, the graceful's good, it looks cool, right? I know that energy in RuneScape 3 is not as, important or whatever, but still, the graceful just looks cool, But regardless, you have agility courses, rooftop agility courses, but they only start at level 10, the earliest being Drainer. The thing is, Jagex basically was like, okay, look, we're gonna probably retouch this, and we want to know your opinion if you want this agility course to stay at level 10 requirement, if it goes down to level 1 and we increase the level of the agility course of the Gnome Stronghold agility course, which used to be level 1, which is really far away from obviously the, early players, especially players that aren't watching YouTubers or aren't really guides. Like, they're gonna not find their fucking way till there to do agility, and even then it's just a pain to get there, right? And we can increase that to 10, or we can leave both at 1, the Gnome Stronghold, that better XP rates for the people that kind of know what they're doing and want to get there, but the Drainer one also at 1, so people can organically stumble upon it. Let's be fucking honest, most people don't have 1 agility anymore or 10 agility anymore, right? The reality is the vast majority of players probably aren't even gonna care that much. It's not gonna have that immense impact as an update. As an update that was relatively a small impact. But that's the thing, Jagex took the time to ask players about it, and then he took the time to, actually establish in a blog post that, hey, this was a change that we made, right? Even if, yeah, it's not a super exciting update or anything like that, it's nothing new, but we gotta like advertise it as, hey, we actually did make this change, right? We're working on these things. It's important for us to establish these things, right? Especially because for newer players, it's much better to just organically stumble upon Drainer, which is very common for new players to do, and be able to do Slayer, to do Agility, without having to go all the way to fucking Narnia to start those skills, right? You know, it's a little introductory thing that players can organically stumble upon. So even if it's not going to affect the vast majority of players, and even if technically it's kind of like wasted dev time, quote unquote, it's a huge thing, it's a huge change to make. But it's a change that can only happen when the community supports these things. And that's the thing, because old school tends to celebrate this type of updates, especially in their blog posts, and making them sound exciting. Players are very permissive when it comes, and even supportive when it comes to them actually happening. Players don't question if Jagex is wasting dev time or whatever, like in RuneScape 3. Players just sort of go along with it because, well, they work, you know, and it's important things for the game, and the devs probably know why it's important. But in RuneScape 3, if devs try to do this shit, they just get it with a bunch of, oh, it's death content, and oh, it's wasted dev time, and why are you even doing this, you know, like, where's the new boss, where's the new skill, right? Which to me, I just think it's very unhealthy for the game, you know, and that, again, like, all of these is just straight up reflected in the blog posts, right? Because RuneScape 3 blog posts, they don't tend to highly advertise that many things when it comes to QOL. You know, old school is always like, oh yeah, these brand new, like, we changed fucking, I don't know, Treble Brewing, you know, you should go give it a shot, and it's like, they just fucking made 2 changes to it or whatever, right? But that's like the type of, you know, celebration, like the type of hype that the old school blogs bring, that RuneScape 3, in my opinion, don't. And that's the thing, like, I will always feel more incentivized and prefer to read old school blog posts, regardless if they're updates or not, than RuneScape 3's, right? Because RuneScape 3 just feels so much drier, it feels so much more formulaic, and like a lot of exciting things that the game has to offer and that the update has to offer, that even if it's just, again, QOL, they're just kind of relegated to, oh yeah, here's the patch notes, by the way, rather than just being, oh yeah, here's a cool new thing, even if, you know, we just made like 2 tiny changes to it, right? And as a result, I think that players tend to not want to engage with other aspects of the game, because oftentimes, and this is something that happens a lot, especially in RuneScape 3, or especially in, or with me in RuneScape 3 rather, that's what I meant to say, is that oftentimes I'm doing a piece of content and I'm going, wait, they changed this? I didn't even know they changed this, right? Because they do such a bad fucking job at advertising, like, tiny changes that people are going to notice and that are important to the piece of content you're doing, right? While in old school is like, yeah, sure, we fucking just, you know, made 2 forestry changes where we changed a few numbers in the code, but hey, here's some cool, exciting forestry changes, you know, now it's much better for you to do forestry, right? You should go and try it out, right? Like, it's so much more exciting, it feels more exciting, it feels like, you know, old school blog posts just want you to actually go in, try the game, try the update, and even if it's something tiny, just go out there and have an adventure. RuneScape 3 is like, please don't hurt us. Like, I know that we don't have a new boss this week, but please, like, you know, we're still making changes to the game. Don't, please, you know, like, we're please stick around. You know what I mean? And just like, there isn't the same excitement, and as a result, the community kind of also reflects that, where, you know, you release a new skill into the game, I devour the skill in 2 weeks, and then I complain that the skill wasn't even that much content to begin with, even though it was an entire skill to begin with, right? And I saw that happen with Necromancy, and it's something that I still don't understand to this day. Look, it's an entire skill, I don't understand how people just rush through it for like a week or 2, and then complain that, oh, where's the other major update, Jagex? Where's the major? And I'm like, they just released an entire new skill. For comparison, Forestry, which was basically a couple of random events, a fucking shop, and tree behavior changed in old school, took not only a long time to the point where the week prior to its release there was no update, the 3 weeks after that were just Forestry updates pretty much, right? And it's like, bro, a new skill is like 10 times Forestry, you know, and it's wild to me that in RuneScape 3 people just complain there's no more content even though they just devour the skill type thing, right? It's that type of culture that there is. And I mean, granted, look, some players have the trim cape and stuff like that, and they don't want to go back to the content that they've already done and whatnot. I get that, But at the same time, I think that you have to stop catering to the players that have already completed the game. It's fine for those players to just fucking quit, take a break from the game, come back 6 months later when there's new content and stuff like that. Just because ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, casuals make the game. And the reality is a lot of these updates are far more important for the casuals than for the people that have already completed the game or the people that have been playing the game for a long time. Old school does this a lot. Again, like the agility example. Again, who is this going to benefit in the game, especially in the people that are, really good at the game or whatever, and they've already an account and they've had an account for more than, say, a month. It's not going to benefit almost anyone, but that's the point. It's not to benefit people currently in the game, it's to look at the future and say, hey, it's much better for a game, at least polish-wise, for players to be able to just randomly stumble upon Drainer and organically be able to do agility because their curiosity peaks at a symbol on the minimap or on the map, right? They see the thing on the wall, they want to click on it, and as a result they stumble upon agility, right? It's just much better to do that organically than for them to have to go all the way to the Gnome Stronghold. Yeah, as a change, it's a change that doesn't mean much, but for the future, it just helps that tiny detail of polishing the game, And old school is filled with this. That's why it feels so good for new players to actually start playing the game, right? It's a game that is really polished from that perspective. And the early game matters because ultimately, I don't give a fuck how good your late game is, I really don't care. If you don't get me hooked on the first 2-3 hours, I couldn't give two shits how good the 100th hour is. You know what I mean? And this is a sentiment that it's important. Not to say that, you should be able to showcase everything a game has to offer in the first few hours of the game. No, by a long shot. I do think that some people really have this weird misconception of, I know that there was a trend in MMORPGs where people sort of talked about how, you have to wait 100 hours until the game gets good or whatever. I don't think that's a good argument, but now it seems that we've done a 180 and people think that unless a game can show everything good that it has to offer in the first 100 hours, then it's a bad game, and I just don't think that's the case either. But regardless, my point is your game needs to be good consistently all throughout, beginning, middle, end, you need to give a reason for players to feel satisfied after a few hours of playing the game, but you also need to give them a reason to keep pushing forward and keep playing the game past the 50th hour, 100th, 200th, 500th, right? Just need to make all of that process satisfactory. And right now, as it stands in RuneScape 3, a lot of the early game just doesn't have that polish. A lot of it is janky, a lot of it is just methods that are all over the place because Jagex kept adding and trying different things and not working, right? And the reality is, if you don't make it more exciting and if you don't, reflect or make the community understand that, hey, it's important for us to care about these things and we're going to celebrate them and we're going to, talk about them in a blog post and we're going to highlight them in the blog post and stuff like that, regardless if you like it or not, regardless if you think that we're wasting that time or whatever, I think the game is always going to suffer for it. I think it's one of those things where it's you have to admit that sometimes it's okay to have, short-term loss for a long-term gain, and I think that when it comes to devs spending time on the early game and polishing the early game and making sure that players more organically stumble upon things and whatnot, I think that is far more important for the longevity of the game at the cost of short-term dev time of them working on some silly new quest or whatever. Another thing I didn't mention is Drainer in old school as a Slayer Master, a level 1 Slayer Master, alongside a quest that introduces you to Slayer pretty much, right? And introduces you to Slayer monsters and introduces you to the need that some Slayer monsters require specific gear in order to be defeated, right? Or in order to be protected against, right? So they have those peaks, I think that's what, I don't know, specifically the animal or whatever, but essentially you need some special goggles in order to defeat them, right, and complete the quest. Again, who the fuck is gonna give a shit about this? The vast majority of players are not gonna care about this because they've already done Slayer, they already know how Slayer works, right? The players that are entering the game probably already know about Slayer anyway, they've watched videos on YouTube of people doing Slayer and everything. Who gives a fuck about this? But again, it's much better for players to organically stumble upon this And yeah, granted, you can say that, oh, it was wasted dev time, they could have been developing Raids 4 or whatever, right? And yeah, they could have been doing that, but it's much better to have an early game that actually feels polished, where people can organically stumble upon things, rather than, not have any of that. And RuneScape 3 heavily lacks this, right? And again, I know that I'm sort of a bit all over the place here, but I just want you to understand that the blog post, in my opinion, sort of reflects how the community treats Jagex and how essentially the devs feel towards certain pieces of the game and certain pieces of content. To me, the fact that RuneScape 3 tries to almost like apologize in their blog posts when it comes to only having quality of life updates in a post, right, in an update, showcases that they're probably afraid that the players and the player base will, call them out for not doing enough work or not having enough updates or whatever. While in old school, this gets celebrated. It's a huge difference, and it's a difference that, in my opinion, in RuneScape 3, you really need to start changing. Look, some players are going to complain about that content and blah, 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 blah. Who gives a fuck about them, dude? Like, you have a game and you have a commitment to a game, and first of all, you're already developing endgame content, because there's multiple teams at Jagex, and some of them are always developing the new boss or the new quest or whatever, right? So that's always going to be going on. So like, just have more faith in your ability and knowledge of what would be best for the longevity of the game, especially when it comes to the early and mid game, rather than what, the end game players want, because RuneScape 3 is filled of end game players, and usually they're the most vocal. Who gives a fuck if they think that, something like Sicarius, or the Hill Giant boss, Obor, or, the Moss Giant boss, Briofit, or the new fucking Ice and Fire Giant bosses, schools just introduced. Who gives a fuck if they think that's that content because it's mid-game content or whatever, like, you just gotta trust more your instincts of these will actually be good for players because they will organically stumble upon it, right? Because right now, RuneScape 3 really struggles a lot with the onboarding process and explaining a lot of what the game has to offer, and this ties into my third topic, which is the RuneScape 3 combat, which is not actually the RuneScape 3 combat, but more so how people tend to perceive problems in the community and how people talk about them. I need to talk about this because I'm not very happy with how people do it, generally speaking. I'm not here to call out any specific person or to say that a person is wrong or a person's right. That's not the point. I'm just trying to offer insight on maybe how we could be conducting the discussions around certain content in the game that could potentially be more beneficial for the community and the devs, rather than just trying to like sling mad at each other, right? So a problem that I've seen for the past couple of months has been the Necromancy, right? Because Necromancy was released late 2023. Pretty much ever since Necromancy was released, people have been complaining, oh, it's too OP, right? Why? Apparently, and I haven't done Necromancy, so I couldn't like tell you from experience. This is just what I hear other people say. Basically, it's too easy to use Necromancy to do PVM. It allows you to do most PVM without any problems, and because it's way easier, usually people don't tend to change to other combat styles, right? Which, from what I hear, other combat styles actually tend to be better because they tend to have higher ceilings, but because they require way more effort, especially in learning abilities and rotations and stuff like that, they tend to not be as popular as Necromancy is, because Necromancy is just enough. And usually what people tend to talk about when it comes to Necromancy is, oh, Necromancy needs to be buffed, or rather, Necromancy needs to be nerfed, and the other combat styles need to be buffed, right? And I think that this is pretty much the conversation that happens whenever any update in RuneScape 3 happens, or like any piece of content exists in RuneScape 3, is always, oh, they need to buff or nerf things. It's never they need to change things. It's always, oh, they need to buff or nerf. And I think this actually is pretty reductive when it comes to a lot of the conversations you can have about the pieces of content you are talking about, right? Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes these conversations need to happen, and sometimes you do need to balance the game, right? So I'm not saying that you should never nerf or buff anything. Clearly these updates are needed, but in RuneScape 3 is like, people only talk about these things. Like, this is the only thing that exists. It's either you buff something or you nerf something. That's it, right? And I think that's pretty unsatisfactory. So I went and looked a bit into it, not much because I'm working on engineering, which ironically, actually, one of the main things that people talk about when it comes to fixing the engineering and fixing the fact that the skill is unpopular is to buff XP rates. And I'm just like, that's exactly what has happened multiple times in the past, and it hasn't fixed the skill, right? So, yeah, it's just an example of maybe the conversation should not be that one. And, you know, when I release my video, you'll probably understand the route that I took and why I took it, but I'm still working on it, and it will probably take a little while still to come out, because there's actually... Okay, look, I'm not gonna lie, the engineering video is getting a bit bloated, and or maybe not bloated, it's just being blown out of proportion at this point, because I always tend to do that, but I think it's gonna be a banger video. Look, I think it's looking to be 30 minutes plus at this fucking point. But yeah, essentially, when it came to combat, one of the things that seems to happen, or at least like one of the actual problems that people tend to have is, okay, necromancy is super easy to get into, other skills aren't. So the problem maybe is that other skills aren't easy to get into, right? So maybe we could make the onboarding process for other skills a bit more satisfactory, right? Maybe the problem isn't the existence of necromancy, maybe the problem is that other skills are so outdated, because EOC has come out like 12 years ago at this point, right? Almost 13. You know, like, it's incredibly old. So, I mean, EOC is older than old school RuneScape. You know, so maybe instead of asking for nerfs to necromancy because it's too easy or whatever, maybe you should ask Jagex to take a look at the other three skills and the abilities that they have, and ask them to make them not just as easy to onboard into, but also give them, maybe the same satisfaction that people get with necromancy, right? So they bring all of the skills, or at least the other combat skills, up to speed when it comes to how they feel versus necromancy, so, it becomes a game again of which skill you kind of prefer. But maybe that's not the only issue, maybe the issue is, you need to unlock certain EOC abilities for certain DPS rotations to become good and everything, and when it comes to necromancy, they're simply cheaper, right? Like, I spent 600 mil on Magma Tempest, or whatever the fuck the ability was. I spent half a bill on a fucking EOC ability. Like, most players are not gonna have that fucking GP, so if you're telling me, oh yeah, you should, invest into magic, and then I fucking start seeing the price of shit, and I go, oh, so I need to, spend a bill on EOC abilities, and I need to spend another bill on just perks for the gear, and then I need to spend another bill on gear, and then I look at necromancy, and I go, oh yeah, you need to spend, 50 mil, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna go necromancy, it's just much easier, the barrier is much lower of entry, right, and I know that another problem is usually how easy it is to obtain the gear in necromancy, which that is changing with the runecrafting update, the fletching update and everything. They're making it just easier to actually craft weapons to use in set skills, especially when it comes to endgame, which I think is a very good change, honestly. Players might not think so, but personally I think it's a good change. But, they're taking care of that, but still, maybe it's the barrier of entry that's the problem, right? So, maybe you shouldn't ask people to get off of necromancy and change their combat style to other combat styles. Maybe what we should be asking ourselves is there a problem with sticking with a certain combat style, or should we require players to use multiple? Because maybe if you want to value the fact that you're using different combat styles, especially because of the weaknesses of certain monsters and everything, then you should ask players to switch their gear around more and whatnot, but then, EOC abilities. If I always use magic, even if I use Rev, I kind of got used to how magic abilities sort of work. So I'm not gonna want to change gear mid-fight just because weaknesses or whatever, right? I'm just kind of gonna try and stick it out and just eat the time loss and, the resources that I'm gonna spend extra on something, right? So, if you want that to happen, maybe then you should look at the abilities, and maybe you should make it a way where, for example, one of the changes that I don't understand Jagex making is some of the skills, at least between magic and ranged, some of the abilities, they might not be entirely the same, but a lot of them are very similar. And something that I don't understand is why they don't just make a typeless ability that works for both ranged and magic, and like the magic or the damage just gets calculated based on your gear, rather than having two very similar abilities that kind of do the same thing, but they're kind of different because they're for different combat styles. Like, if I start playing the game right now, and you tell me, okay, here's these abilities, and these abilities do these things. These abilities will work for every single combat style you'll ever come across, right? And then depending on, which combat styles you want to spec into, you'll unlock more specific abilities to that combat style. Maybe I'm not going to have as much, trouble changing combat styles, right? Because I will always have a certain baseline between certain combat styles, right? I always have a certain baseline of what the abilities I can rely on, because there's always some abilities that I know what they do, right? Or maybe you want to carry that all the way and make it more like old school RuneScape, where, you know what every single ability does, but that ability's damage, and as a result weaknesses to monsters, is based on player's gear. So essentially, rather than players specking into a specific ability or a specific combat, rather, they actually just kind of have all of them, and then the gear just plays a much bigger part, right? Or you want to go the complete opposite, and you want every single combat style to actually feel unique to each other, right? And actually even more unique than they already are, right? Like Necromancy. Necromancy, from what I've seen people say, again, I haven't tried that, so I can't say, but, Necromancy, people say that it feels much different than the other combat styles, which is why it feels much more satisfactory to use, right? So maybe then what you want to do is have every single combat style be very unique, and players pick one of them, right? Like that they can sort of spec into. Maybe you have some early game training where you can speak with a tutor, and depending on your combat level, you can unlock specific abilities for specific combat styles, right? Maybe you can have your combat level sort of have a skill tree where you can unlock slowly combat abilities for the different combat styles, so you can start getting used to the different abilities and the different combat, you know what I mean? Like, regardless of how you want combat to be, regardless of how you want combat to evolve in a way, right? Which I think that RuneScape 3 does need a sort of EOC 2.0, not in the sense that you need to completely rework combat, but in the sense that you need to update EOC 1.0, right? And regardless of how you want it to look, at least there are other things, in my opinion, that you can do that solve the problem of everyone sort of tends to stick with Necromancy and not care about other styles, despite it being easier, right? I just think, again, I just think there's a lot of things you can do that kind of solve the issue, or can at least appease the issue, or, there's a lot of things that you can do that don't necessarily rely on. You just nerf the combat style. Because what you gotta think about is, okay, let's say Necromancy coming in took away the prestige of earning, a certain boss skill or a certain enrage or whatever, right? So as a result, you want to nerf it, because you cannot have that, right? And you want to push players to use other combat styles. Let's say that I really fucking love Necromancy. You're nerfing my combat style, that's not gonna make me feel good. Especially because you're doing it for no fucking reason other than prestige or whatever, right? I'm not gonna give a shit at that point about changing to other combat styles. I'm gonna stick to Necromancy and get upset that Necromancy got nerfed. You're not gonna make me want to try other combat styles, you're just gonna make me upset for having a combat style you decided to nerf for no reason, right? So it's is this the right approach? Should we do this? Do you think that this is the best way to solve the issue? Because when we actually look at the problem, and when we look at the potential outcome, to me what it seems is that it's going to cause way more fucking problems to nerf Necromancy than to try a whole plethora of other things. And granted, a lot of the things that I talked about do take way more fucking effort and work to do than to just nerf some numbers or whatever, right? But at the same time, they do feel much more satisfactory, and they are better for the longevity of the game, right? Because combat is a thing that Jagex, in my opinion, does need to address, properly. Not, oh yeah, we're gonna make some changes to some ability. No, they need to properly address how even players get into it and whatnot, right? One of the main issues that I have is, for example, I use Rev, right? And I use Revolution because I like to play the game kind of like old school. I just throw up the fucking bar, I click on a monster, and that's what I like to do. That's how I play old school. Old school doesn't have abilities. You fucking put your gear on, put fucking protection prayers, and click on the monster to kill it. That's what I do. That's why I like to play the game, right? And I'm glad that RuneScape 3 does give me that option. I can promise you that if Rev didn't exist, I wouldn't be playing RuneScape 3, because I wouldn't give a shit about the combat, you know? And skilling, well, I mean, old school has better skilling, so, you know. Like, literally, the only reason as to why I'm playing RuneScape 3 is because Rev, right? The combat feels different than old school RuneScape, but I don't need to fucking do what most MMORPGs do, where I need to, like, learn every single fucking skill ability and, you know, fucking have a thesis on learning ability. I don't need to do that shit. It's just like, you click on a monster, the game uses abilities for you. But then you need to ask yourself, okay, do you want the game, especially late game, to have this, right? A culture where players just kind of want to click a boss and the abilities are used on their own, or do you want players to start actually engaging with manually using abilities, right? And only using Revolution when they kind of want to AFK something, right? Because if that's the case, then a lot of your tutorial, a lot of your onboarding process in the game should be focused on using abilities, unlocking abilities, making sure that, you know, your abilities are, that the player knows the abilities that they're using and what they do and everything, right? And again, like, this could be done with a combat instructor, this could be done with, you know, mini quests, you know, like a mini quest series thing where you would, you know, slowly unlock different abilities and unlock more abilities just, you know, based on your combat abilities and everything, right? You know, and then you could easily have sort of NPCs that tell you that you can unlock certain abilities or that you can defeat bosses for them and whatnot, to like paint a picture to the player and make them understand that these abilities are scattered around the world and you can collect more of them, right? And if you collect more of them, you can come back here to like train them. You know, one of the coolest things about, like, for example, Jack 2, I remember, essentially you can unlock weapons and you have 4 weapons. And when you unlock a weapon, one of the missions that you need to do is go through the training course to try and get at least a specific score. Well, you can try and get more, obviously, right? And essentially, that just sort of teaches you how to, because you have to go through the course, right? You have pretty much unlimited ammo, and you can just go through it and sort of try different combos and whatnot to try and understand, okay, how does the weapon actually work before I have to, like, use it in combat or whatever, right? And I just think, like, RuneScape 3 kinda lacks that, because, I mean, sure, you do have a tutorial for combat, don't get me wrong, but, like, I don't find this satisfactory because most of the times I don't, like, learn what it actually, like, what the abilities actually do, especially when you have 4 different combat styles. And I think that's another thing about Necromancy. You do have a quest specifically for how to train it and everything, right? Sure, you don't have a quest to teach you, at least I don't think so from my research, but you don't have a quest to teach you all of the abilities and everything. But that quest, the introduction type thing, already, you know, puts you in the mindset of, I need to learn how this skill works. And as a result, since the abilities are part of the skill, I need to learn how the abilities work. Whereas for the other 3 skills, you don't have anything like that, so you sort of just don't care about that, right? And the players tend to struggle more when it comes to that, right? So, you know what I mean? It's like, regardless of how you essentially look at it, is it better to sit there and argue with people that something is prestigious or isn't prestigious, and as a result it should be nerfed or not, versus, hey, can we actually come up with ideas that can actually solve the issue, the actual issue, right? Because oftentimes people like to talk about the actual issue being the numbers that something does, when that's not the issue. Again, I cannot attest this myself because I don't know, but from what I've seen from other people, usually ranged and magic and even melee actually have higher DPS ceilings than Necromancy does, right? So clearly people aren't using Necromancy because it's quote-unquote the best combat style out there, because other combat styles do more DPS. But then why do people want to keep doing Necromancy if that's not the case? Oh, it feels better. Okay, then if it feels better, the, you know, issue here is simply that the other skills don't feel as good to use, so you should change other skills to feel as good to use as Necromancy, rather than just nerfing Necromancy for no reason, right? Like, you know, my point is, especially when it comes to this, is I think that oftentimes the way people look at the game and look at updates just isn't the most... it's not the best, right? It's not the most informative, and I think that we need to stay curious and actually, like, ask ourselves deeper questions and try to pose the same question from different perspectives to try and understand, is this actually the problem, or is it the problem something else and we're not just kind of seeing it? You know what I mean? Obviously I'm using RuneScape Combat here because I know that's been an hot topic for the past couple, I mean pretty much ever since Necromancy has been released. I've seen threads after this, and, you know, I've seen Reddit complain about it, etc., right? So it's a very popular thing to do, it's a very common thing to do. But personally, like I'm just using it as an example, but this happens with everything in the game, right? This happens with skilling, this happens with, even close scrolls and everything, right? Like, so essentially, I want people to be a bit more curious and like ask themselves, what's the actual problem, right? Like, if I say that, for example, I'm making a video on engineering, right? People don't seem to like the engineering. The engineering is not a very popular skill, right? There are a lot of people like it, sure, but okay. What do people that actually do the skill and like to do the skill actually love about it? And the people that don't like the skill, what they don't like about it, right? Is it complete the opposite thing? Because if it's the opposite thing, then it's like, well, okay, changing anything about this is gonna make the people that like the skill maybe not like it, and it doesn't guarantee that the other people will like it all of a sudden, right? Because it's changing the core of what people like or don't like, right? But maybe you can make changes where people, people that don't like the skill can learn how to like the skill, and the people that already like the skill don't need to quit it because you kept that part of the skill and changed, right? Rather than just talking about, oh, no one likes to do the engineering, let's just buff XP rates because that's gonna fix it, Like, at that point, you're starting to feel like the fucking lane dilemma or whatever the fuck it's called, where it's like, oh, just one more lane will fix traffic, and it's exactly the same thing. It's like, oh, yeah, like, just one more buff to the XP is gonna fix the skill, it's like, yeah, that we already tried that, it didn't work, so clearly maybe the problem isn't XP rates, the problem is something else, and if the problem is something else, then let's be a bit curious and ask ourselves, what could the problem be? Rather than just talking about XP rates and talking about nerfs or buffs, right? Because I think that tends to be very reductive to how complex RuneScape is as a game. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should never talk about buffs or nerfs. They're needed, they're important for the game. At the end of the day, it's all about numbers, right? But what I'm saying is sometimes maybe it's just not as good to talk about it, or not as good to focus on it, and that we need to do other things, right? So yeah, I mean, just stay curious about it, and yeah, I'll see you with the engineering video hopefully at the end of the month, and if there's any interesting things that I want to talk about next week, I'll come back with another ramble, since again, I'm trying to make this to at least have some content out there, because I tend to not have a lot of content lately, and the videos take a long while, so I'll try to have this just for people to have something to listen to weekly.